Okay, Stranger Things 5 obviously has caused a lot of talk and controversy and upset and whatever. Um, I was kind of surprised when I saw that. I mean, it wasn't my favorite 3 episodes of TV that I've ever seen, but I thought there was so much that was really well done. And one thing particularly, I mean, I've got a lot of thoughts on a lot of it, but one thing particularly that I've seen people complaining about and slamming and criticizing, I've just seen one too many people say this, is the Jancy breakup. I loved it. I thought it was beautiful. I thought it was perfect. It was one of my like top 3 moments in volume 2 for sure, unquestionably. I don't even know what the other 2 were, but I know this was up there. And I feel like a lot of us seem to be missing the point of the series. Not that like I know the point and you don't, whatever, but I can't see a satisfying ending for Nancy or Jonathan where they didn't break up, and I thought this was the perfect way for them to break up. So I'm going to talk about why, and maybe that will help convince someone that, oh, this was a good decision, and I can be happy that these 2 characters have split. Um, or maybe not. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like I needed to verbalize this because I've seen too many people saying that they didn't like the breakup or the breakup wasn't necessary. Okay, I'm not sure if that lighting will be better. Yeah, I'm going to try to stick to my notes because I have a tendency to get on tangents, and I wrote a lot of notes, so I'm going to try to just read them verbatim. And hopefully that will prevent me from rambling or repeating myself. But I think the whole thesis of how I see their breakup is their relationship can be summed up in the idea that safety is suffocating, right? They both need space. Nancy needs space to figure out what she wants. Jonathan needs space to let himself learn that wanting something for himself is not doing something wrong. It's not bad. He deserves that. And I thought the metaphor of the goo, like the sort of quicksand sinking, and when they stop struggling, that's when they're able to escape. I thought that was perfect. I also loved the introduction of this like weird 80s sci-fi Ghostbusters goo. Loved that. So I'm going to start with Jonathan and his kind of emotional arc as I see it, and then Nancy, because then that leads into the Stancy possibilities. But I guess one more disclaimer before I really get into it. Stranger Things is not a romance show. Stranger Things is a show about trauma and identity and coming into your own and coming of age. Like, it's not a romance. And of course, we have ships. I'm not going to pretend that I don't ship various couples. I was a huge fan of Jonathan and Nancy in season 2. I loved their season 2 storyline, and I've loved how their storyline has played out. But I think this was the right end, and I think seeing their breakup as like a failure, as the end of like as a, I don't know, as a negative in any way, does both of the characters a real disservice and just kind of perpetuates the narrative that the characters are both here to not discredit, but to reject, I guess. So, first of all, Jonathan. Jonathan's emotional arc has kind of 2 to 3 sort of big points for me. That's gaining a sense of self-worth, learning emotional boundaries and how to stop people-pleasing and self-abandoning out of guilt, and learning to take action not out of obligation, but from a place of like honesty and empowerment, and thereby healing his own trauma. Because we often overlook Jonathan's trauma, and he's got the same childhood trauma as Will, plus the trauma of feeling like it's his fault that his brother went missing, which never should have been on him. So, starting with gaining a sense of self-worth. Season 1, he has such low self-worth. We see that over and over again. And he gets a sense of self-worth from trying to do the right thing, trying to look after Will, trying to protect him from their family's fights, sort of by trying to do the right thing, by trying to be good enough. But that's never going to give him a sense of self-worth. Self-worth can only be attained by focusing on himself, not using a romantic relationship that he's doing enough, that he's doing the right thing, and not using his relationship with Will to validate that he's doing enough and that he's doing the right thing. In season 2, we see this tendency, this low sense of self-worth when he tries to coddle and take care of Will. He can't find the balance between supporting and suffocating. And then in season 3, he struggles to follow his boss's orders and support Nancy in her like investigation of the rats. He's trying to please them both because he doesn't have that sense of autonomy and worth if he's not pleasing them. And because he's trying to please them both and afraid of upsetting both, he ends up acting solely in ways that he doesn't really want to. So instead of taking the time to explain to Nancy that he needs the income from the job, but if she thinks it's important, he'll investigate with her in the evenings or on the weekend, he shuts her down and then abandons the job that he knows that he needed. I think season 3 is kind of the peak of his season 2 and 3. He's really trying to. Season 2, he takes a little bit of sort of power back for himself and says, no, I'm going to do the thing that I want. And I think season 2, Jonathan and Nancy, works really well because they both go after the thing that is not what they're supposed to want or what doesn't feel like the right thing when they get together. And that works beautifully. Season 3, though, they're settling into this like obligation again. And the whole relationship by season 4 and 5 has become an obligation. So season 3, yeah, he shuts her down. He's afraid to do something wrong. He's afraid to disobey his instructions. And then he abandons his work and upsets her because he doesn't have the confidence to do what he actually thinks he should do. Learning emotional boundaries and stopping people-pleasing and self-abandoning. Jonathan needs to learn what he is and isn't responsible for. He is not responsible for healing or fixing Will. He is not responsible for making Nancy happy. What he is responsible for is showing up authentically in both of these relationships, being honest about how he feels and what he wants, and that he wants to be there for the people who he cares about most. Season 4, he explains to Argyle why he didn't apply to Emerson College and applied to Lenora Community instead, and the reasons he has aren't wrong, but he can't even fathom being honest with Nancy. Argyle suggests that he doesn't lie, and he says he says, I think, not lie. He repeats it 3 times because he just can't conceptualize being honest with her about something that he thinks will upset her. And he can't be honest with her about something that he thinks will cause her to lie to him, to act out of obligation, and to build up resentment towards him. This is like such classic self-abandonment, not even giving the other person the chance to decide if they want to show up for you and just saying they won't do that or they won't be happy doing that, so I won't let them. I won't give them the option to support me in this. And then it just weighs on him more and more because the whole relationship is getting embroiled in these pretenses. And the reasons why he applies to Lenora also indicate that he still feels that he owes it to his mother and to Will to sacrifice his agency and the chance to even think about what he might want for his future in order to sort of keep showing up for them, to be there for them. He has made it quite clear at this point that he thinks it's his job to abandon everything he wants to just be there for his mom and Will because of the trauma that they've all gone through. But we know in season 1 he wanted to go to NYU. NYU isn't even mentioned. Like, he had dreams and goals and plans. And since the further trauma, in addition to his like childhood shit with Lonnie and Joyce and having to be a parent to Will from the time that Lonnie left, he now doesn't even consider that. Season 5, he also explicitly tells us that he was going to propose to Nancy so that he could do something right, so that he could have gotten something right in the end, not because he wanted to marry her. This is so common and so unbelievably unhealthy, and having that be the happy ending on screen would have just continued to reinforce this narrative culturally, and honestly, we have way too much of that already. There is no benefit to having Jonathan propose to Nancy out of obligation and having her agree to marry him because it's what's safe and what feels stable. That's not a good story. That's not something we need to see. And having them break away from that narrative is exactly what both of their characters needed to do, and exactly the what's the word? The trajectory that they've been on since season 1. So in season 4 and 5, we finally see Jonathan taking some of that agency back and not sort of trying to people please. He does it with Will in season 4 and 5, and Nancy in season 5. With Will, he starts in season 4 by helping him to go find Eleven, but not sort of making it his responsibility, and by supporting him through what he can see as a difficult situation with Mike, talking to him in the pizza parlor, expressing that he knows that he can talk to Will as well because they're brothers, right? Because they have this bond and they're connected and they love each other, but not because he is the big brother, not because he's trying to take care of Will, because it's not his responsibility to take care of Will. So he's moving to reciprocity and interdependence rather than like emotional caretaking. Then in season 5 with Will, he is showing his support during the coming out scene. I really loved Jonathan's reaction there. I think it was my favorite of the whole scene. I also have thoughts on the coming out scene. I don't hate it as much as everyone else does. I think there are reasons why it was kind of stilted and awkward. And I think Jonathan's reaction shows kind of the real emotion behind these kind of weird, performative, scary, like constructed vulnerabilities. Not vulnerabilities, but constructed moments of vulnerability that we have to sort of subject ourselves to sometimes, or that we feel we have to. With Nancy, he finally, no, sorry, one more thing. At the beginning of season 5, I think this is also a great indication. Jonathan says that he thought Will was setting an alarm, but demonstrating that they are working more as a team now. They are on the same level. He's not taking care of Will as much as he thought he needed to in season 2, for instance. Then with Nancy, he finally stops people-pleasing by being honest with her. I loved their confessions. I loved that they were confessing to shit that was actually kind of shitty. Like, giving a sweater that someone loves to Goodwill without checking with them is a douchey thing to do. And it indicates, like, it's not, their confessions weren't all nice, sweet, loving things. They were actually things that were problems, things that were not good. And I personally see the Upside Down as like the collective shadow, or the home of the collective shadow. And so to me, it makes perfect sense that this scene happened in the Upside Down, when they finally let the stuff that they weren't willing to say come to the surface, and the small stuff allowed him to lead up to the big stuff, allowed him to be honest about having the ring in his pocket, about not applying to Emerson, allowed her to be honest about knowing that he hadn't applied to Emerson, and about why he didn't tell her and why he was going to propose. The fact that he felt like he was doing something wrong, that he wanted to get something right for once. Jonathan has this guilt and trauma over Will's disappearance, that it was his fault and his responsibility, and he's finally starting to get over that to some extent. This is allowing him to relate to and connect with the people in his life without taking on the responsibility of emotionally caretaking, healing them, fixing them. This is like 1,000 times healthier for him, for them, for the relationships generally. And now Nancy and Jonathan can both acknowledge that they still love each other and they are not meant to be together romantically. They can enjoy the friendship that they formed over these years, through the trauma, through everything, without the pressure to perform, and performing this role out of fear that not performing it and being honest about not wanting to perform it anymore would hurt the other person. So Jonathan's guilt and shame are deeply rooted in Will's disappearance, and they never motivate him to do sort of positive things. Guilt and shame are not what lead him to look for Will. That's just wanting Will back, missing him, wanting to find him, caring about him. It's not what leads him to try to expose the corruption at Hawkins' lab. It's not what leads him to join Nancy in the mystery of the missing fertilizer. That a little bit, but he really joins her in it afterwards, when he realizes, oh, there is something going on here. And when it's no longer just an obligation. When he joins her out of obligation, that doesn't go well. That sort of spirals. What the guilt and shame do lead him to do are to fight Steve in the alley, to baby Will in season 2, to try to like heal him and coddle him, to then leave Will alone on Halloween because he wants to he doesn't want to upset Will either. He's trying to please everyone around him and not thinking about what would be the right thing to do, to lie to Nancy about college, and then to plan to propose. None of these things are him acting how he wants to act. But he's never gotten to act how he wants to act because he has had this guilt hanging over his head about Will going missing and it being his fault. It wasn't his fault. It was never his fault. He was forced to become a parent to Will, putting way too much responsibility on his plate and making the majority of his identity and his emotional struggle about his inability to perfectly care for and protect a child when he was 16. This also reflects his season 4 storyline and how much he's smoking. A lot of people seem to act like the Jonathan Weed storyline is just like comedic or comic relief, but like that's not how we act about any character's drinking. Like Karen's drinking, we can very clearly see is alcoholism as a result of a deeply unfulfilling and unhappy marriage, of feeling trapped in this suburban nuclear family that Nancy talks about. And when we see Nancy binge drinking in season 2, we also understand that it's grief, it's coping, it's a trauma response. But for some reason with Jonathan smoking, we kind of ignore that. And it's the same thing. He has become dependent on a substance in order to cope and in order to numb and deal with this trauma. Not deal with, but to avoid dealing with the trauma, to get through just existence. He's numbing and avoiding his problems with weed and Lenora. He doesn't know how to cope with them. And this is highlighted when he's honest with Argyle about college. And he has this little like anxious spiral. And the solution presented is Purple Palm Tree Delight. It's literally linked. Like, he has become dependent on weed because he is trying to not face all of the shit that he feels guilty for. But he's doing it to escape the weight of an obligation and a responsibility that never should have been his in the first place. He should be able to smoke with his friends, just like Steve can drink at the party and it's fine because he's not doing it out of coping and as a sort of survival trauma response. He deserves to have the opportunity to let go of some of this responsibility, but he hasn't been able to. He can do it a little bit more in Lenora because he can give up that responsibility for a short time without worrying about Will's life, but it's not ever dealt with. It's not ever really surrendered. He never really surrenders that responsibility and that obligation and that sense of guilt. So he doesn't, it's not a healthy way of doing it. It's not an actual relinquishing of the responsibility that was put on him way too young. Proposing Nancy, marrying Nancy, even staying with Nancy is just a different method of seeking the same result, of numbing and refusing to look at how he really feels and risking upsetting the people he loves by putting himself first. So by breaking up with Nancy, by them being honest with each other and them breaking up, that is exactly the thing that is going to prevent him from acting out his parents' relationship, which all the way back in season 1, he says, I guess he and my mother loved each other at some point, but I wasn't around for that part. He is about to get himself locked into that same trajectory of a marriage out of obligation, maybe resulting in some kids because neither of them can say that they don't want that, and then leading to children again feeling like a burden and feeling like they need to take on the responsibility for raising the other children who are also not wanted. So this is the best thing for Jonathan, in my opinion. He's finally setting himself free of one of the things that is a huge obligation and a huge weight on his shoulders, and allowing himself to actually take the time to do what he wants, to heal, to figure out what he wants, and to start prioritizing himself in literally any way. So on to Nancy. Nancy's character arc, hers is more like a little essay setup. There's less on Nancy. But Nancy's character arc from season 1 revolves around her not repeating her parents' storyline and is explicitly tied to her romantic life. There's no separating the two. Since season 1, her story has been about breaking out of the suburban home and the expectations that come with it, specifically the expectation to, as Jonathan says when they're fighting in season 1, episode 5, live out a perfectly boring little life at the end of a cul-de-sac, exactly like their parents who they thought were so depressing. And she frames it very similarly, right? When she talks about her parents' relationship, she says, I don't think my parents ever loved each other. My mom was young, my dad was older, but he had a cushy job, money, came from a good family, so they bought a nice house at the end of the cul-de-sac and started their nuclear family. Jonathan says, screw that. She says, yeah, screw that. She doesn't want that life, and yet she's locking herself into it with Jonathan. But her whole story is about breaking out of that. It's all about not being just another, as Jonathan again says, just another suburban girl who thinks she's rebelling by doing exactly what every other suburban girl does, until that phase passes and they marry some boring one-time jock who now works sales and they live out a perfectly boring little life, etc. Like that's the I don't want to say defeat. That would be a lack of growth for her, to end up married and living in a cul-de-sac in a perfect happy relationship, getting ready to have some kids. That is the ultimate tragedy for Nancy Wheeler. And she's not able to break out of that narrative in season 1. Right? At the end of season 1, she's still too scared of being different. She's still not really confident enough. She's had like a glimpse of it, but we see her go right back to Steve. She falls back. She regresses, I guess. There's a word for it that starts with re, and I can't think of it. Retreat. That's it. She retreats to the safety of the relationship with Steve, despite all of the events of season 1. Season 2, she gets closer to what she wants, closer to the truth, but Jonathan is still part of that arc. He's still part of finding a relationship and settling down. He's closer to what she wants, and in season 2, breaking out of the relationship with Steve to be with Jonathan is her saying, no, this is what I want right now. But trying to make their relationship work indefinitely, they corrupt it into an obligation, an expectation, something suffocating. And we see that in season 3 and 4, how suffocating and restrictive their relationship has become. Because we seem to forget in stories, ending up, and I mean life as well, but ending up together does not mean success, and breaking up does not mean failure. What's important for Nancy is that she's finally being completely honest about what she wants, which we haven't seen from her since that scene in season 2, where she and Jonathan are married and they finally admit that, yes, they do want to be together. And I think at the time, they wanted to be together and it was great for them to be together, and that worked. It doesn't need to last indefinitely for that to be a good relationship, for that to have been what they needed, for that to be valuable. So digging into why this is Nancy's arc and why this story is so important, I kind of have 3 points here. Shared trauma is not a healthy foundation for a relationship. That should be obvious, but it's not. A relationship doesn't need to last forever and result in marriage to be meaningful. I kind of already touched on that. And Nancy is the perfect person, and maybe the only person in this series, to be able to drive home this point that is so central to the themes of the show about freeing ourselves from expectation and narratives and limiting suburban sort of American narratives, I guess. I can't think of another word for it. But the idea that there is one way to live and one correct sort of storyline and life to live out. And it's all about living out the correct life, right? Jonathan's trying to do the right thing and Nancy's trying to live the right life. So trauma. Yeah, it should be obvious that shared trauma is not a healthy foundation for a healthy relationship, but apparently it isn't. Even though people become closer after, often people become closer after going through traumatic experiences together. But especially in a show that is specifically about trauma and about healing from trauma, to suggest that this is the best foundation for a lifelong partnership would be crazy. As people heal, as they overcome their trauma, as they grow as adults, remember these two got together in high school, It is natural and healthy for them to evolve into separate people apart from the trauma that brought them together. That is healing, for them to be able to move on from it. That is a really good thing. They shouldn't be tied to this thing that bonds them together forever. They don't need to forget about it. They can still love each other and care about each other and value each other's place in their lives. But they deserve to heal and move on from that time. We see this in the breakup scene and the fight preceding that. As much as they care about each other, they are different people and they are not necessarily compatible in a romantic relationship. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. That's not oh, it's the death of Jancy. No, both of these characters now are able to live out lives that are so much better for them and will be more fulfilling because they're not locking themselves into a relationship and a marriage that wasn't what either of them wanted in the first place. A relationship does not need to last forever and result in marriage to have been meaningful. Nancy needed to escape the narrative that says marriage and college and climbing a career ladder are what matter in life. And we've seen her make strides to that in every season, but she's never fully broken away until this point. She is now, I think we can safely say, left behind that narrative. She's not with Jonathan. She's not planning to get with Steve. She's working on her shooting and saving the world. She has broken out of the role of perfect young suburban woman who's, pretty and clever and has the right boyfriend and goes to the right school and climbs the career ladder as a journalist. She's broken out of that. Maybe she still wants to be a journalist. Who knows? But she specifically says she doesn't know what she wants. She needs the time and the space to figure that out. And she deserves to have it instead of just becoming Jonathan's wife and buying a nice house at the end of a cul-de-sac and starting a nuclear family. She doesn't want that, and she deserves a chance to see what she does want. The narrative that insists that any relationship that ends has failed and is a loss is so harmful. It encourages people to marry and settle down with partners that they don't really want to have that with. And it just leads to more Karen and Ted Wheeler relationships, which we're shown clearly in season 5. We've known the whole time, but we're really shown in season 5. Neither party is happy. Just because they're adults, just because they're the parents, we tend to brush this off as well, that of course parents and couples are miserable together. That's not healthy. That's not normal. Maybe it is normal, but it's not what we should be normalizing. We should be normalizing divorce and breaking up and growing apart from partners and saying, hey, this was a great time in my life. I really value you. And now it's time for us to go separate ways. That's so much healthier. Not every relationship is going to last your whole life, and it doesn't need to have been meaningful. Were Nancy and Jonathan attracted to each other at one point? Absolutely. Did they love each other? Definitely. Do they still love each other? Yes. Did they put in the effort to communicate and make their relationship work for a while? In season 3, yeah, they did a lot of that communication towards, obviously they had the fights first, but towards the end they did communicate and they made it work, but it's not working anymore. And none of that devalues their relationship. But similarly, none of it is reason enough for them to stay together. Nancy is the perfect person to do this, to make this choice. Jonathan needed to say, I'm not actually going to propose. He needed to do that for himself, to make that choice and put himself first and say, I don't want to propose, so I'm not going to. But for Nancy to then get the chance to say, yeah, you're right. This is not what I want. I need to be alone. She loved Jonathan. She still loves Jonathan. But they both know that staying together and especially getting married is not what either of them wants. So her rejecting that expectation and that narrative in favor of finding her way independently is really the only satisfying conclusion to her personal arc that was set up in season 1 and is finally getting the payoff that she deserves. Finally, some thoughts on Stancy, okay? And I've kind of touched on most of this already, so I guess skip it if you want. But the main thing here is that Nancy does not want the life that Steve wants. Nancy makes it very clear in the breakup scene, as well as countless times before, throughout the whole series, by what she says and how she acts. She does not have any particular interest in having kids. Steve does. Steve easily falls into a paternal role with the party when they're younger, and in my view, Steve is our one hope for a healthy father figure in the series, which we don't see anywhere else. We get zero healthy father figures in this series, except potentially Steve. Steve is the hope. He is the father who isn't controlling. He is the father who listens. And he wants to be a father. He's not getting roped into it or stuck in it. It's not just an expectation. He's not taking in a girl from the woods, trying to heal his own grief and trauma at his daughter dying. Like, he's not calling himself Papa and imprisoning a bunch of children. The father figures that we get in this series are so deeply fucked. And Steve is the only one that is actually someone who wants to be a dad, the only one who wants to care for and parent and mentor kids. And Steve deserves to have that. And Nancy deserves to not have that. Like, for Nancy to get together with Steve now would just be reducing her back to a love interest, to a future wife of Jonathan, a future mother of Steve's children, and it would completely rob her of the agency and the space that she's finally been honest about needing. If she goes and gets with Steve now, that would be a huge disappointment to me. That would be not a, I guess, yeah, a failure of the story to like really give Nancy any kind of satisfying conclusion. If she just decides in the finale that she actually wants to be with Steve and just slot herself into his fantasy of her. Like, she can think that he's a good guy. She says, season 5, she says Steve's a good guy. Season 1, she says he's actually a good guy. Like, she can believe that honestly now, because it has become honest. Season 1, it wasn't really. She was trying to pretend he was a good guy because he was the guy she had picked out for her image. Now she can know that he's actually a really good guy, and she can even acknowledge that he has better hair than Jonathan, and that she cares about him as well, without needing to slot herself into his fantasy of her as his partner, his love interest, the mother of his children, right? Because she doesn't want that. Steve knows what he wants. She says, you know, she has grown so much since season 1, so has Steve. Steve now knows what he wants, and that's great, and Nancy doesn't. And she deserves the chance to figure that out, while Jonathan deserves the chance to do what he wants, to actually enact what he wants, to act for himself for once. And Steve deserves the chance to find a partner who isn't this fantasy, this image that he's had since high school, to find a partner who wants to raise kids with him, if he even needs a partner. Like, there's so much pressure on like the couples to get together and to be happy together forever. That's not, like, right now the partner that Steve wants isn't a real person. It's just someone sitting next to him. So him knowing what he wants out of life, kids and vacations in the summer and being that kind of mentor paternal figure, now he can go out and find someone who wants to do that with him, who's an actual person, rather than this like cardboard cutout of Nancy Wheeler that he's had since junior year, I guess. He's in grade 11 when they meet, I think. But he has the chance to actually go out and find that. Nancy has the chance to find out what she wants, and Jonathan has the chance to finally act for himself instead of acting for Will or his mom or Nancy. I also think it's so telling of kind of this, I don't know, this issue of like the idea of a breakup being a failure and being the end of the world and being a bad thing, that people are confused by a breakup that is so caring and affectionate and loving, where two characters can acknowledge, I love you, and we're not going to be together anymore. That's kind of part of the problem to me, it seems, that like people want characters to stay together like at any cost, and can't acknowledge that people can love each other and recognize that they're not right to be in a romantic relationship, that that's not what either of them wants or needs. And the fact that that scene was like misconstrued, that people didn't understand they had broken up, I think is part of it, because we imagine breakups to be like huge catastrophic things. And that's just not necessarily the case. You can have a healthy breakup. You can have an honest conversation where you're vulnerable and you tell someone that you don't want to be with them anymore and not have it turn vicious and angry, and like that just doesn't need to happen. And I think this was such a mature, emotional, beautiful break. I certainly understood right away that they were broken up. I mean, it's an unproposal. How much clearer can you get? Will you not marry me? Like, we're done. Like, they were so clearly like, we're not right for each other. This is the end of things. I was trying to fix things, but this isn't what either of us wants. And I think the fact that when we see that and we see that care and affection, we go, oh, so they fixed things. They're together. They've fixed it. It doesn't need to be fixed. The correct solution here is for them to break up because they're not right in a romantic relationship. And the fact that seeing love and affection and care in that kind of scene makes us think, oh no, there's hope. They're going to be together. That's a happy ending, is just absurd. Like, we need to normalize breaking up without like character assassination. We need to normalize being okay ending a relationship and that not being a bad thing, because it's not. It's just that that's like the narrative, the story that we tell ourselves. And that's part of what kept them together so long. And it's deeply harmful, and it keeps a lot of other people together when they shouldn't be as well. So, I don't know, I think we could all learn something from Jonathan and Nancy, I guess. And like, even if it's just how to break up without totally turning on your partner and ruining everything that was between you. But yeah, I kind of forgot to mention that people found it confusing. I think that's because we're not used to associating a breakup with like that much care and that much honesty. And like, we think when we see honesty and love and care, we're like, oh great, so they fixed it. Like, yeah, they came to a solution, and the solution is that they're done, and that is the best solution for them. So anyway, I'm starting to ramble now, but just wanted to add that in. So that's all I really have to say there. Yeah, I loved this scene. I liked Volume 2 a lot more than a lot of people, it seems, but I was really shocked at like partly like the vitriol and how aggressively angry and like people are like rioting. And yeah, there were some scenes I didn't fully love, but I don't know. I do not share the opinion that it's like the worst TV ever and the Duffers have ruined Stranger Things, and like there's still 2 hours left. And I think they did so much in these few episodes that was so necessary and so promising. Like, to me, this was a huge win. This was like top of my wish list for Volume 2 since probably since before Volume 1 came out, since Season 4, if I'm honest. And I think they executed it beautifully. And I think it gives me a lot of hope to see like the way that the care that they're taking with characters' emotional arcs to hopefully get other characters the same kind of conclusion and like satisfying ending. So yeah, I don't know. Thanks for sticking around while I kind of shared my thoughts here. Would love to hear if anyone else has thoughts, opinions, feelings on this. Yeah, that's it, I guess.